Hello, everyone. I am Sam Gannaway from the Photoshop desktop team. I do need to remember to say that part, desktop, now since Photoshop comes in so many flavors. However, desktop is what I'm here to present, so let's get to it. Slide. There we go. So, you should see a poll appear pretty soon. It's just a very simple one. So please, when you have a moment, click on that. All right. When I spoke here last year, I had some pretty big numbers to talk about detailing the effort that we had put into the UXP DOM API with the target of extend script parity. And then last year, we saw this wave crash over the creative landscape. So the past year has been considerably different, as I'm sure you've all noticed just by how many times the letters A and I have been said together so far in just this event. I'm not going to talk about any of that for my time here, except to say that while Adobe has Firefly and Photoshop has incorporated it into a number of features at this point, we don't have any barriers to other services. And I'm sure many of you already know that there have been third-party plugins that talk to other generative services for at least a year, I think. All right. So let's talk about our stuff. So again, on the extend script parity point, there was one item that I believe came in after June of last year, and that is selection, which is, not surprisingly, called selection under document objects. Again, it's aiming at that parity with extend scripts. So if you're familiar with that, this should be familiar. We have some other items that are still hanging out, and we do want to get to them, but we have to hit a balance. And we've tried to spread out across some other items this year, including, as was mentioned just a moment ago in the last session, so hybrid plugins. And just a recap for anybody who didn't see the previous session, a hybrid UXP plugin is a UXP plugin and a compiled C++ library together. Sounds great. Originally, the C++ library was more of a general purpose, which was great for whatever compute or communications perhaps you wanted to do. But there was the rather obvious use case of Photoshop compiled plugins built with our C++ SDK. For example, through the magic of math and C++, let's say you create a new kind of blur filter and would rather build the UI with the flexibility and rapid development of UXP. And that sort of combination is the type of thing you could do with a hybrid plugin. Technically, you could do similar combinations with CEP and UXP beforehand, but this hybrid packaging makes distribution so much easier. You don't have to worry about creating your own installer, any of that. And for those of you familiar with the C++ SDK, you should find all of those plugin types available to you. All right. Action recording of UXP plugin commands. What am I talking about? All right. Let's say that you use the Photoshop imaging API to create a new fabulous funky filter all in JavaScript. You package that up with a big button into a UXP plugin and make it available to the world. Awesome. You're making the world a funkier place. Then you hear from some of your grateful users that they would like to use your filter in some of their automated workflows that they've created using recorded actions. I get it. It's like waffles on waffles. To make that happen, we introduced a new method called record action, and it allows developers to make a function call that is defined inside of their plugins, recordable, as a step. Basically, it sends out a message to Photoshop to say, hey, if you're currently recording an action, jot this down as a step. Then when the action is played back, a message is sent to your plugin to say, run this, and then the magic happens. There were a few wrinkles to iron out upon the introduction of record action, but part of that reason is that this is actually new territory. This capability is unique to UXP plugins. We did not have this with CEP. You won't be surprised to hear that bringing this to bear was not by chance. It is partly driven by our own first-party bundled plugins. We want our features to be recordable, to be used by all of our users. We want edits to the document to be recordable, whether it's ours or yours. All right, some small items, but still important, because for probably a few years, we would have occasional reports of mystery, an intermittent error when changing active document, and you get an error that said there's no active document. Well, there obviously has to be one because you have at least two open. This is, of course, a very difficult thing to diagnose and debug because it is very intermittent, but we finally got out our big shovels and dug down deep enough to find the fault. There was a sort of unnecessary delay construct that could allow a gap, and if your request fell into that gap, you'd get the no active document. So we snipped that out, and we haven't heard anything like that since. Next up is that there was an issue reported by a hardware peripheral maker that the plugins menu would fail to rebuild after a lot of execute as modal calls. And if you can imagine any sort of hardware or even software UI manipulation of, say, a slider or a dial or a bellows, if that's your thing, you can imagine a continuous amount of interactions that could generate a lot of execute as modal calls as you're trying to edit the document. So we found that, the menu handling wasn't prepared for that. So we prepared it for it now. All right. Since we mentioned execute as modal, lots of people mention execute as modal. There is an error that probably is familiar to a number of you, which is that one of your calls to execute as modal could come back with an error. Host is in a modal state. And attempting to debug that is difficult because there isn't much to go on at that point. We would see this even internally as we were developing plugins as well. So we had a couple of ideas to make this either easier to diagnose or possibly alleviate it altogether. First up is the error message itself will now provide the ID of the plugin that is holding Photoshop in that modal state. So if it's your plugin, you have some explaining to do to yourself. If it's another third-party plugin, you could disable that for the time in your development or mention that to them. And if it's us, let us know. The second item that we changed is we introduced a timeout. Now, originally, execute as modal would, if it was blocked, it would immediately come back with that failure. So we introduced an optional delay, which is to say that if it's blocked, it will wait by default 1 second and try again. And that option value is available to you, and the documentation is forthcoming. All right, hurrying up. What's next? Well, you heard UXP 8 is coming out, so we're working with the UXP team to get that into Photoshop when we can for all the new and amazing things. Lastly, I do want to ask you to please continue to go to the forums at creativeclouddeveloper.com. Ask a question, report a problem, suggest a new feature. Perhaps more importantly, scroll through the other posts. Click on them, read, like, reply. The more activity a post has, the more likely it is to be noticed, logged, and prioritized. The more impact a change is expected to have, given the interest, the more likely it will get done. Thank you.